So over the course of the last year or so, things have just kind of been collecting everywhere because I just kind of been throwing things everywhere because our building was closed half the year and all that great fun stuff. So I'm trying to finally get around to cleaning things out, maybe finding new purposes for things. So that's what my afternoon is looking like today. Old soundboard. Those are way heavier than they look, by the way. It's kind of funny once you start taking the junk apart, what you find. Look at there. Somebody's had a little too much candy in here, maybe. Someone's been hiding a secret stash. Lovely. You know, when I look at the things that God calls us to, most of it's pretty simple to understand. I think the problem people have is that it's not the easiest thing. While God's design is pretty simple in a lot of ways, God never calls us to an easier life, and He never claims to. There's no bait and switch unless someone has lied to you. God actually calls us to a higher standard of living, one that requires you to look at the best interests of everyone and not just yourself. It's a higher standard because loving your neighbor is pretty much as difficult as you can get. If it were an easier way to live, a more convenient way to live, then everyone would be doing it. I mean, think about all the stuff that you try to get out of by choosing the easiest option, the path of least resistance. That's why when people say Christians are simpletons or bigots or ignorant traditionalists who haven't moved on with the times, I don't buy it. Right now we're in a series that most people write Christians off about. They haven't stuck around for the whole story, and if they have, then they just didn't like it. If you haven't been here for the past few weeks, or if you love to sleep your way through church talks, we've been discussing things like sex, virginity, and pornography. And while we try to keep it low-key and not stress anybody out, there's still something about these topics that feels a little uncomfortable. But why? This is kind of what we've been asking ourselves the last several weeks. And I think one of the reasons is this. When it comes to sex, sometimes adults talk about it in a really intense way. Maybe your health teacher talks about sex like you're going to get an STD and die. Or your parents are more nervous about having the talk with you than they are about teaching you how to drive. Maybe you've heard people here at church talk about sex like it's the most important thing ever. And here's what's confusing. While some adults talk about sex like it's dangerous or bad, other adults seem to think that it's not a big deal at all. Maybe you have family members who talk about sex like it's totally casual. You've listened to songs where artists talk openly about it, celebrities joke about it, and pretty much it's just all over the internet. People who don't openly talk about it seem to be doing just fine. And here's what I'm getting at. Some people act like sex is a huge deal. Other people act like it doesn't matter at all. Some people act like having sex is catastrophic, and others act like it's completely casual. But which is it? Most of us don't pick catastrophic, and why is that? Maybe it's because you know people who've had sex and they didn't die, or you did and didn't ruin your life. And when you talk to some people who've experienced something and they tell you it's no big deal, then the most logical thing to do seems to be just to believe that it is no big deal. Believe what they're saying. So you get in this pattern of believing that sex is casual. You've probably never thought about it in those exact words, maybe you have, but maybe you've told yourself that a hookup is no big deal, or tried to talk yourself out of catching feelings for someone you've been physical with, made all kinds of jokes and laughed about sexual things. Maybe you sent nudes. Maybe you pushed someone's boundaries or even your own because you told yourself that it really wasn't that big of a deal. If that's you, I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm saying that you, like the rest of us, live in a world where the normal pattern of thinking is that sex is just a casual thing. So it's natural for us to start believing that it is. At the same time, Even when we tell ourselves that something isn't a big deal, you may have noticed that sometimes it can become a bigger deal. Maybe you noticed that it wasn't a big deal to one friend who hooked up, but it really affected another. Something was said as a casual joke, but you still felt a little uncomfortable. Maybe somebody told you to be chill, and to be honest, it just really affected you. Maybe porn seemed casual until you saw something that made you feel awful. So even though sex isn't catastrophic, there are times when it doesn't seem so casual either. I want you to think about it this way. Sex isn't casual no matter how casually it's treated. And that's my goal here today. My goal is not to tell you what to think. I want to help you understand how to think when you hear two competing ideas about a subject that can affect your life. Obviously, this is a skill that you should have for a lot of things, but it's especially true when it comes to this conversation. So to do this, I want to look at something that the Apostle Paul said in a letter to a group of Christians in Rome. Now, here's what you need to know about this. Rome, at the time that Paul wrote this, did not have messages that were in line with what Jesus taught. There was lots of conflict, kind of like what we see today. So for people who were trying to follow Jesus in the Roman Empire, there was this tension between what was normal at the time and what Jesus was inviting them to. In fact, it's possible they were feeling the same sort of things that we are, conflicting messages about God and what it means to follow Jesus. And chances are they felt some confusion over what was the real story and who they should believe. So with that in mind, Paul writes this. He says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." Paul is never one to dance around the point. He gets right to it. He's saying that there's a certain way people around you live, and there's a pattern, but that doesn't mean that you should conform to it. God is inviting you to do something different. God isn't just asking you to believe something about him or about the world. He's asking you to live differently. He's asking you to treat yourself and others differently as a result. God doesn't just want to be a good idea to you. He wants to be the force that shapes the decisions that you make. So in terms of sex, what are some of the normal behaviors or patterns of this world? Maybe it's that we're not supposed to feel any feelings when it comes to sex. Or sex is something that just happens and is a part of the moment, but not something that you bring up with that person ever again. Or sex is a rite of passage, and if you don't do it, you're not really an adult. Or maybe you're weird if you see porn and feel uncomfortable about it. Or when you hear a joke where someone sends you a picture, it's not a big deal, and acting like it is just overreacting. These are just some of the messages that we get from what's happening around us. It's definitely a culture of casual sex, but there's more to that story. So before we go any further, I want to clarify something. Tune back in if you tune out for a second, because this is really important. If you're getting any messages that tell you to stop feeling, stop thinking, or stop caring, pay attention. If you feel like your gut feelings are an overreaction or that you're weird or naive for having feelings, take notice. If something is telling you to turn off your feelings or pretend to be okay when you're not, that's generally not a great idea. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. A few verses later, Paul says this. He says, "Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves." Paul obviously isn't talking about sex or dating here, but that doesn't mean his advice doesn't apply to this area of our lives. He tells us to love and care about each other sincerely. That doesn't mean to pretend like you care about someone or be fake so that you can get something from them. No, he tells the Romans and us to really love others, to hate what is evil, wrong, or hurtful, and hang on to what is good. That's a different message than what we're hearing in a culture of casual sex. Think about it this way. If we have to talk ourselves out of feeling something, or if we have to turn off our conscience in order to make that joke, watch that clip, or open that picture, then we aren't being sincere, genuine, or real. We're being fake. The chief sin of Gen Z, inauthenticity. We're just pretending. And God has called us to something more. God is inviting us to be transformed into something new, something better. God is calling us to be the kind of people who understand that how we treat another human being is never casual, no matter how casual people act about it. He raises the bar for us and calls us to live by higher standard. God, who invented sex, designed it to be a good thing, to be significant and to matter. And if we're getting messages that tell us that it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal, or we should have less feelings about it, it doesn't exactly line up with the heart of God. If someone sends us a pic and something in our heart goes, I shouldn't look, that's something worth paying attention to. If we're going further in a relationship than we want and our hearts are getting involved more than we think is okay, then we need to listen. That's an invitation for us to transform our minds, think differently, and refuse to conform to a way of thinking just because that's how everybody else thinks. Listen, because as we talked about last week, sex is a highly emotional thing, there are significant dangers to treating it casually. When we do start to have sex or doing sexual things with someone we're not married to, then those emotions really start to muddy the waters for clear thinking. For example, think about the purpose of dating. Our culture may say it's for fun or so that you can avoid loneliness, but I think we all know that the point of dating someone is to figure out if they are someone you want to marry. You don't want to waste your time or your emotions with someone you're not interested in marrying. So if you're dating someone, meaning you're on a journey to figure out if they're the someone that you want to spend the rest of your life with, and you have gotten physical or introduced sexuality of some kind into your relationship, and then you start to see some red flags or reasons you wouldn't want to spend the rest of your life with this person, then you're more likely to overlook those things because of the emotional attachments you've created by introducing sexuality into your relationship prematurely. There's a reason God designed it to work a certain way, and there's a reason that we're held to a higher standard or a pattern of thinking when it comes to this topic. In a culture of casual sex, there's more to this story, and Paul tells us to transform our minds beyond what the culture tells us. But how? To start, you need to know that if you're feeling any shame over things you've done in the past, there's no judgment here. And I know several of your groups have been able to have really great conversations about this already in the last couple of weeks, but every single one of us has done something we regret, something we're not proud of, or something that we wish that we would have thought through a little bit better. No one is better than anyone else. We're all created in the image of God, and we're all called to do what Paul is suggesting, no matter what our sexual history is. We can all be transformed and begin thinking in a new way. And here's how. Start by identifying where you've been affected by a thought pattern. When it comes to sex, in what ways are you tempted to conform or just go along with what everyone else is doing or saying? Have you viewed it as something that's not a big deal or something that you should turn off your feelings towards? You owe it to yourself as an adult to think critically about how much cultural messages affect you. It's difficult to take a different approach of something you're not aware of. So start paying attention to the way the culture influences your thinking. Then be transformed, as Paul says, by renewing your mind. Changing how your mind works isn't easy, but there are some helpful tips that you can use. If you want to change the way that you talk or joke about sex, maybe memorize a single Bible verse to remind you of the power of words. Maybe there's a pattern for your decisions that you make, and when you go to certain parties or hang out with certain people, the end result is usually the same. So for you, maybe the decision that you need to make is to avoid certain people or places for a little while. Maybe instead of thinking about people as an object for your benefit, begin thinking about people as human beings who are uniquely created and loved by God. Maybe it's a pattern that has created some secrets that are slowly hurting you. I know this one is extra difficult, but sometimes the absolute best way to change your thinking is to talk about what you're thinking with someone who's older, wiser, and trustworthy. It will also be relieving for you to share what you're going through and get that burden off your shoulders. In turn, they can help you check your thinking and your choices. What is it that you'd like to see transformed in your life? No matter what it is, just know that sometimes a transformed mind starts with transformed behavior. In other words, even if it takes a while for your thinking to change, you can start living like a transformed person now. Your thinking will follow eventually. So live like there's more to the story when it comes to sex. Live like sex isn't casual. Look, I get that sex is a complicated topic. There are plenty of competing messages about what's okay, what's not, and how you should live. That's why I think having a small group leader is such a big deal. I want every person here to have a trusted adult that they can talk to about anything. Someone who has your best interests in mind. It may be a little intimidating to bring things up at first, but if you have some things that you need to talk about, here's what I want you to know. They won't be surprised, they won't judge you, and they'll help you sort out what is and isn't a big deal. Your small group leader signed up to be here for you no matter the conversation, and this one's included. They know sex isn't casual no matter how casually it's treated, and they can help you figure out what matters for you, both now and in the future. So as we kind of wrap up this week, I want you to turn to your small groups. and I want you to start having this conversation. For many of you, you discovered over the last couple of weeks that it's a little more awkward at the beginning of the conversation, but once that first person breaks the ice and starts the conversation rolling, then it'll start to feel more natural. And the more you have this conversation, the less awkward it is to bring it up next time. It's just human nature. The more something becomes a habit, or the more we do something, the more natural it feels in the future. So I would just encourage you, I'm challenging you, be that one person that breaks the ice right now as you turn to your small groups, because it'll just make your discussion that much better. I know we've asked you the last couple weeks, on a scale of 1 to 10, how awkward is this conversation? And after talking to all your small group leaders, I know most of you are ranking pretty high up there. It's a 7, it's an 8, it's a 9. Some of you, it's an 11, I don't know who that was that said that, so don't blame your small group leader for selling you out. But I know it can be awkward, but I encourage you, be that person, just break the ice and just move on with it. We're all thinking the same things, most likely. We're all wrestling with some of the same questions. And so turn to your small groups, get the ball rolling. I hope you have a great conversation. And if you're watching this later and you're not in a small group, I encourage you to get connected and to join one. I love you guys, and don't forget, we don't meet next week because of the spring retreat, but then we'll meet the following week. I love you guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll leave you to it.